The fluorescent lights of Murphy's diner buzzed overhead like dying insects, casting harsh shadows across the cracked vinyl booths. Zara Williams smoothed her hands over the faded Formica table, her fingertips tracing the deep scratches left by decades of desperate conversations and broken dreams. The scholarship interview replayed in her mind like a broken record, each dismissive glance, each barely concealed sneer when she'd walked into that pristine conference room wearing her only good dress. Next, the receptionist had called, her voice dripping with the kind of polite disdain reserved for people who clearly didn't belong. Zara had felt their eyes scanning her from head to toe as she entered, the navy dress that Nana Rose had bought from Goodwill 3 years ago, now pulling tight across her shoulders and ending 2 inches above where it should. The scuffed black flats that she'd polished until her fingers ached. The way her natural hair caught the light differently than the sleek, straightened styles of the other candidates waiting in the lobby. "Tell us about your background, Miss Williams," the lead interviewer had said, his smile never reaching his eyes. She'd spoken about her 4.2 GPA, her volunteer work at the community center, her dreams of becoming a social worker. But she could see it in their faces. The subtle shift when she mentioned living with her grandmother, the barely perceptible eye roll when she talked about her part-time job at the grocery store. They weren't hearing her accomplishments. They were calculating her deficits. Now, sitting in the diner's amber glow, Zara counted her money for the 3rd time. $11.67. The interview had cost her a bus fare she couldn't afford, but Nana Rose had insisted she go anyway. "Baby girl, you got to try," her grandmother had said, pressing the crumpled bills into Zara's palm. "Can't win if you don't play." The waitress, a tired-looking woman with graying roots and kind eyes, approached with a coffee pot. "What can I get you, honey?" "Just the scrambled eggs and toast, please," Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's it? You sure? Growing girl like you needs more than that." Zara's cheeks burned. Even kindness felt like pity sometimes. "That's all, thank you." She ate slowly, making each bite last, savoring the simple pleasure of warm food in her stomach. The eggs were perfectly fluffy, the toast golden brown and buttered just right. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to order whatever she wanted, to never count change before opening a menu. That's when she noticed them, the elderly couple at the table beside her. The woman's hands trembled as she stared into an empty coffee cup, her wedding ring loose on her thin finger. Her husband leaned across the table, his voice a worried whisper that carried despite his efforts to keep it private. "Margaret, we can't keep doing this. The Social Security check doesn't come for another week, and we've got maybe $5 left." The woman, Margaret, closed her eyes, her shoulders sagging with the weight of dignity slowly crumbling. "I know, Harold. I thought maybe we could have one nice meal together. Like we used to." Zara's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She recognized that look, that particular brand of shame that came with wanting something as basic as a shared meal and not being able to afford it. It was the same look she'd seen in her own mirror countless times. The waitress approached their table, her expression gentle but businesslike. "Can I get you folks anything else?" Harold cleared his throat, his voice thick with embarrassment. "Just the check, please. For the coffee." Margaret's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Zara watched as the older woman's hand moved instinctively toward the menu, then pulled back as if it had burned her. The gesture was so familiar, so achingly recognizable, that Zara felt something crack open in her chest. She looked down at her own plate, half-finished eggs growing cold, toast she'd been rationing like it was her last meal. Then she looked at her money, counted and recounted on the table. $11.67. Enough for her meal, enough for the bus ride home, and maybe, just maybe, enough for something more important than either. The fluorescent light flickered above them, casting the diner in alternating moments of harsh clarity and merciful shadow. Outside, the first drops of rain began to streak the windows, and Zara Williams made a decision that would change everything. Zara's hand moved before her mind could catch up, signaling the waitress with a quiet urgency that surprised even herself. The decision crystallized in that moment, not as a choice between having and not having, but between being the person the scholarship committee saw and being the person Nana Rose had raised her to be. "Excuse me," she whispered as the waitress approached. "I'd like to pay for their meal too." She slid the crumpled bills across the counter, her fingers lingering on the money for just a heartbeat. $11.67. Her bus fare home. Her lunch tomorrow. Her small buffer against the gnawing anxiety that came with never having enough. The waitress looked from the money to Zara's face, then to the elderly couple, understanding passing between them like a shared secret. "You sure about this, honey?" "Yes, ma'am. And could you not tell them it was me?" But Margaret had been watching, her pale blue eyes sharp despite her frailty. As Zara stood to leave, the older woman's voice cut through the diner's ambient noise like a prayer. "Wait, please." Zara turned, her heart hammering against her ribs. Margaret's face was streaked with tears, but her expression held something Zara hadn't expected: recognition. "Why?" Margaret's voice trembled. "You don't even know us." The question hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of a world that had taught them both to expect the worst from strangers. Zara felt the eyes of other diners turning toward them, felt the familiar heat of being watched, judged, categorized. "Because," Zara's voice caught, "because everybody deserves to eat." Margaret reached across the space between their tables, her weathered hand finding Zara's. "You remind me of my daughter. She had your smile, your heart." Her grip tightened. "Let us pay you back. Please." "No, ma'am. It's a gift." Harold cleared his throat, his voice thick with emotion. "Young lady, we can't accept." "You already did," Zara said gently, pulling her hand free. "Just enjoy your meal." The rain had started in earnest by the time Zara stepped onto the sidewalk, fat droplets that soaked through her thin jacket within minutes. She pulled her arms tight around herself, calculating the 2-mile walk home in her head. Her stomach was already protesting the half-finished meal, but something else filled the empty space, a warmth that had nothing to do with food. Behind her, through the diner's rain-streaked windows, she could see Margaret and Harold ordering, their faces transformed by the simple dignity of choice restored. She didn't notice the sleek black Mercedes that had been idling across the street, or the distinguished man behind the wheel who had witnessed the entire exchange. Marcus Wellington adjusted his rearview mirror, watching the young woman disappear into the rain. He'd been having lunch with his mother-in-law when he'd seen it happen. The quiet transaction, the grace under pressure, the kind of selfless act that his late wife Sarah used to say was becoming extinct in the world. He reached for his phone, then stopped. Some moments deserved to unfold naturally. The walk home took Zara through neighborhoods that told the story of systematic disinvestment in real time, from the gentrified blocks near the university to the forgotten streets where she lived. By the time she climbed the 3 flights to apartment 3B, her shoes squelched with each step, and her dress clung to her skin like a second layer of disappointment. "Zara? That you? Baby girl?" Nana Rose's voice carried from the kitchen, where the smell of cornbread and collard greens made Zara's empty stomach clench with longing. "Yes, ma'am." "How'd the interview go? And why you soaking wet?" Zara peeled off her jacket, hanging it on the back of a chair that had seen better decades. It went fine, Nana. And it's raining." Nana Rose appeared in the doorway, her keen eyes taking in Zara's appearance with the practiced assessment of someone who'd raised children through hard times. "Where's your bus money? Don't tell me you spent it on something foolish." The lie formed on Zara's lips, then dissolved. She'd never been able to hide anything from Nana Rose. "I gave it to some people who needed it more than I did." The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of rain against windows and the distant hum of the refrigerator working overtime to keep their meager groceries fresh. "Child, what am I going to do with you?" Nana Rose's voice carried equal parts exasperation and pride. "That was grocery money." "I know, Nana, but kindness don't cost nothing when it comes from the heart." Nana Rose studied her granddaughter's face, seeing something there that made her own expression soften. "Come here, baby girl." That night, Zara lay in the narrow bed she'd slept in since she was 7, listening to her stomach growl in harmony with the rain against the window. But for the first time in weeks, The sound didn't fill her with despair. Instead, she thought about Margaret's smile, about the way dignity had returned to Harold's shoulders when he'd been able to order his wife a proper meal. She had no way of knowing that across town. In a penthouse office overlooking the city, Marcus Wellington was making phone calls that would change her life forever. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of the apartment complex, casting long shadows across the cracked linoleum where Zara sat, surrounded by job applications. Each form felt like a small act of hope and desperation. Cashier positions, cleaning services, anything that might help her scrape together enough money for next semester's books. The scholarship rejection letter lay crumpled in the corner where she'd thrown it the night before, its polite language unable to mask the underlying message. Not quite what we're looking for. 3 sharp knocks echoed through the thin walls, cutting through the morning quiet like gunshots. Zara's heart jumped. Bill collectors had a particular way of knocking that made your stomach drop before you even opened the door. Zara. Baby, you expecting somebody? Nana Rose called from the kitchen, her voice carrying the wariness of someone who'd learned that unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. No, ma'am. Zara approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole that had been painted over so many times it was like looking through frosted glass. 2 figures stood on the concrete steps, one tall and imposing in what looked like an expensive suit, the other smaller, familiar. She opened the door to find Margaret from the diner, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, standing beside a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, his silver hair immaculately styled, his presence commanding in a way that made the shabby hallway seem even more run down by comparison. Zara? Margaret's voice trembled with emotion. I hope you don't mind us coming here. This is my son-in-law, Marcus Wellington. The name hit Zara like a physical blow. Wellington Industries, the billboards downtown, the corporate sponsorships, the name that appeared in the business section of newspapers she couldn't afford to buy. She felt suddenly, acutely aware of her oversized t-shirt and bare feet, of the peeling paint behind her and the smell of mildew that no amount of cleaning could eliminate. Marcus stepped forward, his dark eyes intense but kind. Miss Williams, I wanted to thank you personally for what you did yesterday. Margaret told me about your kindness, and What's all this commotion out here? The voice cut through the moment like a blade. Mrs. Patterson emerged from apartment 3A, her housecoat pulled tight around her thin frame, her eyes immediately locking onto Marcus with a mixture of suspicion and something darker. Mrs. Patterson, Zara said quickly. I can see what they are. Mrs. Patterson's gaze raked over Marcus from head to toe, taking in every detail of his expensive appearance. Question is, what's a man like you want with our Zara? The words hung in the air like poison gas, their implication clear to everyone present. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. I'm here because your neighbor showed extraordinary kindness to my family. Kindness. Mrs. Patterson's laugh was bitter, sharp. That what we calling it now? Young girl like Zara. Successful man like you showing up at her door. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that carried perfectly in the narrow hallway. I seen this before. Rich folks come around here looking for something they can't get in their fancy neighborhoods. Zara felt the blood drain from her face. Mrs. Patterson, it's not. Hush, child. You too young to see what this really is. Mrs. Patterson's eyes never left Marcus, her suspicion radiating outward like heat from a furnace. We look out for our own around here, and we don't need no charity from folks who think they better than us. Margaret stepped forward, her voice shaking with indignation. How dare you suggest? I ain't suggesting nothing, Mrs. Patterson snapped. I'm saying it plain. Successful black man don't come to the projects unless he wants something. And what he want ain't never good for the girl. The accusation hit Marcus like a slap, and for a moment his composure cracked. Zara saw something flash across his face. Pain, recognition, the familiar sting of being reduced to the worst possible interpretation of his intentions. Mrs. Patterson, he said quietly, I understand your concern for Zara, but I assure you. You assure me? Her voice rose, drawing curious faces to other doorways. Man, I've been black longer than you've been breathing. I know how this story goes. Rich man, poor girl, promises that sound too good to be true. She turned to Zara, her expression softening slightly. Baby girl, you got a good heart, but you got to be smarter than this. Zara stood frozen between worlds. The kindness she'd shown yesterday now twisted into something ugly, the gratitude in Margaret's eyes warring with the protective suspicion in Mrs. Patterson's. She could feel the weight of the hallway watching, neighbors emerging from their apartments to witness the spectacle. I just wanted to help, Marcus said, his voice carrying decades of similar encounters, similar assumptions. Nothing more. Mrs. Patterson's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Help, right? And I suppose you just happened to be in the neighborhood. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the weight of history, of systematic exploitation, of a community that had learned to view success with suspicion because success so rarely came without a price. Zara looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw something she recognized. The same careful composure she wore when walking through stores, the same measured responses she gave when people questioned her presence in spaces they deemed inappropriate. He was performing respectability just as hard as she was, and Mrs. Patterson's accusations were stripping it away layer by layer. Maybe, Zara said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension, we should talk inside. The cramped living room had never felt smaller than it did with Marcus Wellington sitting on Nana Rose's threadbare couch, his presence transforming their modest space into something that felt almost theatrical. Margaret perched beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Zara sat across from them in the mismatched chair that wobbled whenever she shifted her weight. A full scholarship, Marcus had said, his voice steady and sincere, to any university you choose, plus a mentorship program through Wellington Industries. The words had hung in the air like something too precious to touch, too impossible to believe. Nana Rose had gripped Zara's shoulder so tightly it left marks, her weathered hands trembling with the weight of answered prayers. But prayers, Zara was learning, sometimes came with a price that no one warned you about. By Monday morning, the news had spread through Jefferson High like spilled water, seeping into every corner, every conversation, every sideways glance. The hallways buzzed with whispered speculation that followed Zara like a shadow she couldn't shake. I heard she's sleeping with some old rich dude. Ashley Morrison's voice carried from the bathroom stalls, each word designed to cut. That's how these scholarship things really work, you know? Zara stood frozen at the sink, watching her reflection fracture in the cracked mirror. The girl staring back looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of assumptions she couldn't control. That's not true, she whispered to her reflection, but even her own voice sounded uncertain. In AP History, Mr. Davidson's smile felt different, stretched too wide, tinged with something that might have been pity or might have been suspicion. Well, Miss Williams, I suppose you won't be needing to worry about college applications anymore, he announced to the class, his tone carrying an undercurrent that made her skin crawl. 28 pairs of eyes turned toward her, and Zara felt herself shrinking under their collective gaze. Some faces showed curiosity, others resentment, but none showed the simple acceptance she'd once taken for granted. Lucky you, someone muttered from the back row. The word lucky followed her through the day like a curse. Lucky, as if her 4.2 GPA was luck, as if her volunteer hours were luck, as if the years of choosing between textbooks and meals were just fortunate preparation for this moment. At lunch, Keisha's absence from their usual table felt like a physical blow. Zara found her best friend since third grade sitting with the theater kids, her back deliberately turned when Zara approached. Keisha? Her friend's shoulders tensed, but she didn't turn around. Oh, look who's slumming it with us regular people today. The words hit harder than any stranger's cruelty because they came wrapped in 15 years of shared secrets and inside jokes. What's that supposed to mean? Keisha finally turned, her dark eyes cold in a way Zara had never seen before. It means congratulations on your sugar daddy, Zara. Must be nice to have connections the rest of us don't. It's not like that, right? Because rich old men just hand out scholarships to random black girls all the time. Keisha's voice dripped with sarcasm. Face it, Z. You played a game the rest of us don't even know the rules to. The cafeteria seemed to pulse around them, conversations stopping and starting like a broken heartbeat. Zara could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her from all sides, transforming her moment of hope into something twisted and shameful. I shared my meal with his mother-in-law, Zara said quietly. That's all. I was kind to an old woman. Sure you were. Keisha stood, her chair scraping against the linoleum like fingernails on a chalkboard. Just remember us little people when you're living in your mansion. The guidance office smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams, its fluorescent lights casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Ms. Rodriguez sat behind her desk, her expression a careful mixture of concern and something else, something that made Zara's stomach twist with recognition. Zara, honey, I need to talk to you about this scholarship situation. The word situation landed like a slap. Not opportunity, not blessing, situation. I'm concerned, Ms. Rodriguez continued, her voice taking on the patronizing tone adults used when they thought they were protecting you from yourself. These too-good-to-be-true offers, well, they usually are too good to be true. Zara sat straighter in the uncomfortable plastic chair. What are you saying? I'm saying that men like Marcus Wellington don't usually take interest in girls like you without expecting something in return. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. I've seen this before, sweetheart. Wealthy benefactors who promise the world but want favors. The room seemed to tilt sideways. You think I think you're a smart, beautiful young woman who might not realize what she's getting herself into. Ms. Rodriguez leaned forward, her expression earnest. I'm amazed that someone would want to invest in a girl like you, truly I am. But I need you to be careful. A girl like you. The phrase echoed in Zara's mind, each repetition stripping away another layer of her confidence. What did that mean exactly? Poor girl? A black girl? A girl from the wrong side of town who should be grateful for scraps and suspicious of anything more? Walking home through the familiar streets, Zara felt like a stranger in her own life. Every interaction from the day replayed in her mind, each one chipping away at the joy she'd felt when Marcus made his offer. The scholarship that had seemed like salvation now felt like a burden, a mark of shame that followed her wherever she went. The apartment building loomed ahead, its brick facade stained with years of neglect and broken promises. Mrs. Patterson stood on the front steps, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. How was school today, baby girl? She asked, but her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Zara paused at the bottom of the steps, looking up at the woman who'd appointed herself guardian of the building's moral integrity. It was fine. Mrs. Patterson's eyes narrowed. You sure about that scholarship, child? Because once you take that man's money, you belong to him. That's how it works. The words followed Zara up 3 flights of stairs, echoing in the stairwell like a prophecy she couldn't escape. The coffee shop on 5th Street existed in the liminal space between worlds, too upscale for Zara's neighborhood, too modest for Marcus's usual haunts. Steam rose from their cups like incense, creating a barrier between them and the curious glances from other patrons who couldn't quite categorize what they were witnessing. Marcus stared into his coffee as if it held answers to questions he'd been asking for decades. The confident CEO who had stood on Zara's doorstep was gone, replaced by someone who looked suddenly, achingly human. I grew up 6 blocks from where you live now, he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of memory. Same building, actually. 3rd floor, apartment 3C. Zara's cup froze halfway to her lips. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. This man who seemed to exist in a different universe had once walked the same cracked sidewalks, climbed the same stained stairs, breathed the same air thick with broken dreams and stubborn hope. The scholarship committee that rejected you last week? I sat in front of a panel just like that 35 years ago. Marcus's laugh was bitter, sharp-edged. Same polite smiles, same careful questions designed to remind you that you don't belong. The coffee shop's ambient noise, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversations, the clink of ceramic against wood, faded into background static as Marcus continued. They told me I wasn't the right fit for their program. Said my background was concerning and my references were unconventional. His fingers tightened around his cup. What they meant was that I was too black, too poor, too hungry for their comfort. Zara felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition that went deeper than shared experience. She was looking at her future or one possible version of it, and seeing both the promise and the price. How did you? She started, then stopped, unsure how to finish the question. How did I make it? Marcus met her eyes, and she saw decades of accumulated armor in his gaze. I learned to code switch so well I forgot who I was for a while. I straightened my accent, pressed my hair, wore suits that cost more than my mother made in a month. I became what they wanted me to be. Margaret reached across the table, her weathered hand covering Marcus's. Tell her about Sarah. The name seemed to break something open in Marcus's carefully constructed composure. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment, he looked like the young man he'd once been, vulnerable, uncertain, carrying dreams too big for the world's willingness to accommodate them. Sarah was my wife, he said, his voice thick with emotion. White woman from Connecticut, old money family. Met her in business school. He paused, gathering himself. She saw through all my performance, all my careful construction of respectability. She saw me. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. My daughter had a gift for seeing people's hearts. She always said kindness was the only currency that mattered. Sarah used to volunteer at shelters, mentor kids from neighborhoods like ours. Marcus's voice grew stronger, warmed by memory. She'd come home and tell me about these brilliant children who just needed someone to believe in them. She made me promise that if anything ever happened to her, I'd find ways to pay that belief forward. The weight of revelation settled over Zara like a heavy blanket. She wasn't just receiving help, she was becoming part of someone's grief, someone's attempt to honor love that had been lost. She died 2 years ago, Margaret whispered. Cancer. And Marcus has been lost ever since. Until yesterday, Marcus said, looking directly at Zara. When Margaret called me, crying about this young woman who gave away her last dollars to strangers. Sarah would have done the same thing. She would have seen what I see in you, that spark, that refusal to let the world make you smaller than you are. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too intimate for the magnitude of what was being shared. Zara could feel the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders like a mantle she hadn't asked to wear. I'm not her, Zara said quietly. I'm not your wife. No, Marcus agreed. You're not. But you're someone who chose kindness when you had every reason to choose otherwise. That's rare. That's worth investing in. Margaret leaned forward, her voice urgent. Sarah always said that goodness creates ripples. One act of kindness touches another, and another, until the whole world shifts just a little bit toward light. Zara stared at her reflection in the coffee shop window, seeing herself superimposed against the street outside, caught between the world she'd always known and the one being offered to her. The responsibility felt enormous, terrifying. What if I disappoint you? She whispered. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, it reached his eyes. Then you'll be human. That's all any of us can be. Outside, the afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the street. Zara realized that accepting the scholarship meant accepting more than money. It meant carrying someone else's hope, someone else's grief, someone else's dream of a world where kindness mattered more than circumstance. The question was whether she was strong enough to bear that weight. The decision came to Zara in the quiet hours before dawn, when the apartment building settled into its deepest silence and even the sirens from the main street seemed muted by distance. She'd lain awake staring at the water stain on her ceiling, tracing its familiar outline while weighing the cost of dreams against the price of staying small. By morning, her choice was crystallized. She would accept Marcus's offer, consequences be damned. The consequences came swiftly. The first note appeared in her locker on Tuesday morning, folded into a neat square and tucked between her chemistry textbook and a worn copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, designed to avoid recognition. Sell out, bitch. Hope his money was worth your dignity. Zara's hands trembled as she crumpled the paper, shoving it deep into her backpack where it seemed to burn against her spine for the rest of the day. By Thursday, there were 3 more notes, each one cruder than the last, each one cutting deeper into her resolve. At Morrison's grocery, where she'd worked weekends for 2 years, the atmosphere shifted like weather before a storm. Mrs. Chun, who used to slip her extra hours during busy periods, now watched her with suspicious eyes that followed her every movement. "Heard you got yourself a benefactor," said Derek, the assistant manager, his voice dripping with implication as he restocked the cereal aisle. "Must be nice to have connections." The word hung in the air like smoke, thick with meaning that made Zara's skin crawl. She focused on her task, organizing the produce section, but could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her from every corner of the store. "My granddaughter works 2 jobs to pay for community college," Mrs. Washington said loudly at the checkout counter, her voice pitched to Carrie. "But I guess some girls got other ways of getting ahead." The words followed Zara through her shift like a shadow, each customer interaction tinged with speculation and barely concealed disgust. By closing time, her hands shook as she counted her register, the familiar routine offering no comfort against the storm of whispers that surrounded her. The breaking point came on Friday night. Zara climbed the 3 flights to apartment 3B with exhaustion weighing down her limbs. Her backpack heavy with homework she wasn't sure she had the energy to complete. The hallway smelled of industrial cleaner and broken dreams, the fluorescent lights flickering in their eternal dance of illumination and shadow. The words hit her before she fully processed what she was seeing. Spray painted across Nana Rose's door in angry red letters. "House and asterisk asterisk asterisk." Asterisk, the slur seemed to pulse in the dim light, each letter a wound carved into the wood that had protected them for 7 years. Zara's knees buckled, and she found herself sitting on the stained carpet, staring at the violation of their sanctuary. "Baby girl? That you out there?" Nana Rose's voice carried through the door, warm and familiar, unaware of the hatred that now marked their threshold. Zara scrambled to her feet, positioning herself between her grandmother and the graffiti. "Yes, ma'am. Just give me a minute." But Nana Rose had lived too long and seen too much to be fooled by careful positioning. She opened the door, took one look at Zara's face, then followed her gaze to the wall. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Nana Rose's expression didn't change, didn't register shock or surprise or even anger, just a weary recognition that spoke of decades spent navigating hatred in all its forms. "Come inside, baby," she said quietly. "We need to talk." The living room felt smaller with the weight of what they'd both seen, the familiar furniture suddenly inadequate against the magnitude of their violation. Nana Rose settled into her chair with the careful movements of someone whose bones carried the memory of every injustice they'd witnessed. "You know what hurts the most about that word out there?" Nana Rose's voice was steady, measured. "It ain't coming from some white supremacist. It's coming from our own people." Zara sank onto the couch, her body finally releasing the tension she'd been carrying for weeks. "How do you know?" "Because I've been black for 73 years, child. I know the difference between hate from outside and hate from within." Nana Rose's eyes held depths of pain that Zara was only beginning to understand. Some folks so used to scraps, they get angry when they see someone else get a whole meal. The truth of it hit Zara like a physical blow. The notes, the whispers, the suspicious glances, they weren't coming from white classmates or racist strangers. They were coming from her own community, from people who looked like her and shared her struggles but couldn't bear to see her rise above them. "Why?" The word came out broken, barely a whisper. "Because hurt people, baby girl. Because when you've been stepped on long enough, sometimes you start stepping on others just to feel tall." Nana Rose leaned forward, her weathered hands reaching for Zara's. "But that don't make it right, and it don't mean you should make yourself smaller to make them comfortable." The police arrived 40 minutes after Nana Rose called. 2 officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Officer Martinez, young and earnest, took notes while his partner, Officer Brooks, surveyed the graffiti with the kind of bored expression reserved for problems he didn't consider worth solving. Probably just kids playing pranks, Brooks said, his tone suggesting the matter was already closed. You know how teenagers are these days. This is a hate crime, Zara said, her voice stronger than she felt. Brooks turned to her with the kind of look that made her feel suddenly, acutely aware of her place in his worldview. You sure about that? Sometimes people bring this kind of attention on themselves. You been doing anything that might have provoked this? The question hung in the air like poison gas, its implication clear. Zara felt the familiar weight of being required to justify her existence, to prove her worthiness of protection under laws that were supposed to apply equally to everyone. She accepted a scholarship, Nana Rose said, her voice cutting through the officer's casual dismissal like a blade. That's what she did to provoke this. Officer Martinez looked uncomfortable, his pen hovering over his notepad. We'll file a report, but without witnesses or evidence. His voice trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished but its meaning clear. The graffiti would be documented, filed away, and forgotten. Another incident in a neighborhood where incidents were expected, normalized, dismissed. As the officers left, their footsteps echoing in the stairwell like a countdown to abandonment, Zara stood in the doorway staring at the red letters that marked her as a traitor to her own people. The scholarship that was supposed to be her salvation had become her scarlet letter, and she was beginning to understand that sometimes the price of rising up was being torn down by the very people who should have been cheering her on. The community center's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across the folding chairs arranged in uneven rows. The room smelled of burnt coffee and decades of arguments, its beige walls holding the weight of old grievances. Tonight, the tension pressed against Zara's chest as she sat in the back row, her life the evening's spectacle. Mrs. Patterson stood at the podium, her voice sharp with self-appointed authority. We're here to discuss the situation with young Zara Williams and this so-called scholarship. The word situation stung, turning Zara's dream into a problem. Faces she'd known her whole life turned toward her. Neighbors who'd seen her walking to school with duct-taped books and determination. I'm not saying the child did anything wrong, Mrs. Patterson went on, her tone suggesting otherwise. But what kind of message does this send? That the only way to get ahead is to, well, the insinuation spread like smoke. It's charity, Mr. Johnson called out. Rich man throwing money at the first poor black girl he sees. Or maybe something else, Mrs. Washington added slyly. Young girl, old man with money. We've seen this before. Murmurs rippled, suspicion twisting familiar faces into something ugly. Then Zara saw him, Marcus Wellington, standing in the back in his tailored suit. He didn't look ashamed. He looked sad, as if he'd stood in rooms like this before. Zara rose. Conversation stopped. May I speak? Reluctantly, Mrs. Patterson gestured her forward. The walk to the podium was long, but Zara's anger carried her. You want to know what this scholarship is? Her voice rang steady. It's what happens when kindness meets opportunity, when someone sees potential instead of problems. You want to call it charity? Fine. But when white kids get scholarships, do their neighbors meet to question their worth? The room fell silent. When Jennifer Morrison got her full ride, did anyone whisper she compromised herself? Or was she just a smart girl who worked hard? Zara's voice sharpened. How is it different when it's me? Because I'm black? Because I come from less? Shame flickered across familiar faces. We've been taught to tear each other down, she continued, her voice softening, to see success as a threat. But I'm not taking this because I think I'm better. I'm taking it because I know we all deserve better. Chaos erupted, some clapping, others shouting. But Zara stood taller than before. She had found her voice, and she wasn't giving it back. 6 months later, Zara walked the marble floors of the university library with quiet determination. The Williams Wellington Scholarship Foundation had grown from words into hope. Marcus insisted her name be part of it. Now, reviewing applications, she saw her own story reflected back. Dreams wrapped in careful language, desperation disguised as ambition. The community center had changed too. Fresh paint, new lights, energy transformed. The first recipients of the Williams-Wellington Scholarship, Zara announced. Keisha Johnson, for her community work and 3.8 GPA. Applause rose as Keisha walked forward, tears on her face. Once a critic, she had come to Zara months earlier, ashamed. I was jealous. I was wrong. Their conversation about envy, poverty, and lifting each other had been raw but healing. Even Mrs. Patterson had changed. She now sat on the foundation board, the same woman who once doubted Zara's worth. I was so used to disappointment, she admitted. I couldn't see hope when it was right in front of me. Not everyone was convinced. Some still muttered about handouts, but the chorus of support was louder now. At graduation, Zara stood at the podium, cap and gown adorned with an honors cord. She looked out at teachers, classmates, neighbors, some who had doubted her, and younger students who now looked at her as proof. At 17, she began, I thought success meant escape, but I learned you don't have to leave to rise. Success isn't about getting out. It's about reaching back. The applause shook the auditorium, but Zara pressed on. Kindness isn't what you can afford to give. It's what you can't afford not to give. Years later, the brass nameplate gleamed. The Zara Williams Center for Community Empowerment. She adjusted her blazer, her master's degree upstairs, her real education in these very rooms. Margaret cut the ribbon, Marcus beamed, Nana Rose wept. Neighbors once suspicious now cheered. Inside, children studied at computers, teens filled out college forms, and Mrs. Patterson, now volunteer coordinator, guided a young mother with patience. You did this, Marcus whispered. We all did, Zara corrected. That's the point. She watched Keisha teaching financial literacy, then noticed a boy quietly breaking his snack in half to share with a hungry girl. A small act, unnoticed by most, but Zara saw it. Proof that kindness could be taught, that generosity could ripple outward forever. She smiled, remembering her own moment at Murphy's Diner, when she'd learned the truth. Kindness isn't about what you can spare. It's about what you can't afford to withhold. And the ripples kept spreading.